June 27th, 2019. 8:47 p.m. A stretch of desert lay under a fading sky as a convoy of black SUVs approached a set of iron gates hidden far from any main road. The headlights cut through the sand, moving with a purpose that didn't match the silence surrounding them. Inside that compound, the night carried a stillness that felt too controlled, too perfect, almost as if the world outside didn't exist at all. Hours before those gates closed, 2 young women were sitting at Mumbai's airport, smiling, recording messages, calming their nervous families. Their bags were light, but their hopes were full. They left home believing they were stepping into the biggest moment of their lives, a moment that promised possibility, recognition, and a chance to lift the people they loved out of struggle. But fate has a way of shifting faster than anyone expects. By the time their plane touched down in the Middle East, the celebration they were promised was already underway. Laughter and music drifted through the halls of a private estate known only to a select few. Inside, every detail had been arranged with precision. Everything looked ready for joy, except for what would follow their arrival. They were supposed to be honored guests. They were supposed to be performers stepping onto a global stage. But within that isolated fortress, where power moved without question, their presence carried a weight they could not see coming. As night settled over the compound, something about their journey began to shift, quietly, quickly, and without warning. Families back in Mumbai waited for updates that never arrived. Hours passed, then a full day, then more, and slowly a fear began to rise that no parent ever wants to feel. What truly happened inside those walls? Why did 2 rising artists leave home with hope and never come back? Before we go deeper, ask yourself one thing. How can opportunity turn into danger before anyone even knows something is wrong? Stay with me. Before her name reached the flight manifest on June 27, 2019, Anaya Kapoor was a 23-year-old voice rising out of one of Mumbai's busiest neighborhoods. She grew up in a one-room home tucked behind a crowded market, where the sound of shopkeepers and traffic mixed with her childhood practice sessions. Her father passed when she was still in school, leaving her mother to hold the family together by stitching clothes late into the night. From that point forward, Anaya carried a responsibility far heavier than her age. She sang anywhere she could. Small weddings, recording booths with no ventilation, event halls where she was paid just enough to keep the lights on at home. But what made her special wasn't just talent. It was her drive. She kept a notebook where she wrote down every performance, every small booking, every dream she refused to let go of. More than once, she turned down offers that felt unsafe, even when the money could have helped her mother rest for the first time in years. Still, she pushed forward. Every rehearsal was a step toward a version of life she had never seen but believed she could reach if she worked hard enough. By early 2019, she finally started catching industry attention. Backup sessions for mid-tier films, short jingles, and a single that earned modest radio play. It wasn't fame, but it was movement. And movement, to Anaya, meant hope. Her mother often told her, "Your voice will take you further than anything we've lost." And Anaya held on to that. But dreams come with pressure too. She knew time was passing. Bills were stacking, and the music industry doesn't wait for anyone. When opportunities slowed down, she worried she was running out of chances to change her family's situation. So when a message arrived offering an international performance, one tied to wealth, status, and life-changing pay, her heart shifted. She didn't know all the details, but she knew what that money could do. What she didn't know was what the journey would truly cost. Before we move on, ask yourself, what pushes a young talent to step into the unknown? Hope or necessity? While Anaya fought her way through Mumbai's modern music scene, Meera Patil, at only 21, was shaping her own path in a very different world of sound. Mira grew up in a tightly packed apartment near Dada, where families lived close enough to hear each other's conversations through the walls. Her upbringing was strict, guided by a father who valued discipline above all else and a mother who tried her best to soften the household with affection. Music wasn't encouraged. It was tolerated. A hobby, but not a future. But Mira was born with a voice that carried depth far beyond her age. Her first teacher, an older classical vocalist, once told her, "If you honor your gift, it will honor you back." Those words stayed with her at every lesson, every early morning practice, every late night whisper singing when her family was asleep. Still, pressure always followed her. Her father believed stability was the only measure of success. He pushed her toward more traditional careers, urging her to abandon the dream that he believed couldn't sustain her. But Mira held on to music quietly, almost secretly. Lessons became her escape. 3 hours where she wasn't judged, only guided. By 2019, she had become skilled enough to perform at cultural events and small festivals. These weren't glamorous stages, but they were stepping stones. And every applause, no matter how small, made her believe the world outside India might one day hear her. But even with talent, the weight of expectation never left. Her family needed help. Her father's health was uncertain. Money came in slowly, and bills left quickly. She felt responsible in ways she couldn't explain. So when the offer came, an international performance with a pay that could cover months of family expenses, she didn't hesitate long. She saw relief. She saw dignity. She saw a chance to prove that her dream wasn't just passion, it had value. Before leaving, she held her mother's hands and said, "I'm doing this for all of us." It was a promise she believed she would keep. But choices made from pressure often carry risks hidden beneath the excitement. And Mira, determined to help her family, unknowingly stepped onto a path that had already been written long before she boarded that plane. Now consider this. How many decisions in life are made from hope, and how many from fear of falling behind? Anaya and Mira came from different corners of Mumbai, but their paths crossed in a small studio on a humid afternoon in March 2019. It was a workshop meant to polish young voices, most participants nervous, most unsure of themselves. And in the middle of that room, Mira sat alone after receiving a blunt critique that cut deeper than anyone realized. Anaya saw her wiping away tears quietly, trying not to draw attention. She walked over, placed a bottle of water beside her, and said softly, "Your voice is stronger than their opinion." That single moment of kindness formed a bond that took root instantly. From that day on, they were inseparable. Rehearsals turned into shared meals. Late-night practices turned into conversations about life, fear, ambition, and responsibility. They pushed each other because they understood each other. Anaya, bold and determined, encouraged Mira to trust her talent. Mira, calm and grounded, reminded Anaya to care for herself the way she cared for everyone else. Their families noticed the change. Both young women seemed lighter, more hopeful, more confident. It was as if they found pieces of themselves in each other that they had never acknowledged before. They started referring to themselves as two notes in the same song. Different tones, different lives, but perfectly aligned in one dream: to break into the world beyond India's borders. And when the international invitation arrived weeks later, neither wanted to go without the other. They believed opportunities like this came once in a lifetime. They believed their friendship made them stronger. They believed safety came in pairs. They couldn't have known that the journey they stepped into would test that bond in ways they never imagined. Before we move forward, ask yourself, how often do we walk into life-changing moments simply because the right person was standing beside us? It was the first week of June 2019 when everything shifted for Anaya and Mira. They were in a small cafe near Bandra after a long rehearsal. tired, hungry, but laughing about missed notes and stubborn harmonies. That's when Anaya's phone buzzed with a message from a talent contact she barely remembered working with months earlier. The message was brief, almost too direct. A private wedding? A wealthy family from the Middle East? A performance expected to draw influential guests? 3 days of work, a payout neither of them had ever seen. No contract, no website, no clear schedule, just a promise of high exposure and fast payment. Mira leaned closer, reading every line with a mix of excitement and hesitation. She asked Anaya the same question most people would ask. Why us? Why now? And Anaya didn't have an answer. The offer looked unreal, but so did the struggles waiting for them back home. They reached out to the agent who forwarded the message. His replies were short, confident, almost rehearsed. Don't worry. Top-tier event. Safe travel. Once-in-a-lifetime chance. Their families reacted in different ways, some with pride, others with caution, but everyone saw the same thing. An opportunity powerful enough to ease the weight these 2 young women had been carrying for years. Still, something felt off. The timing, the secrecy, the urgency. Yet hope has a way of drowning out hesitation when life has shown you more walls than open doors. They told themselves this was the breakthrough they had been working toward. They told themselves blessings sometimes arrived wrapped in mystery. They told themselves that together, nothing could go wrong. They didn't know it then, but that single message wasn't an invitation. It was the first step into a world that would never allow them to return. So ask yourself, how can a simple notification on a phone become the turning point that redefines an entire future? June 27, 2019, 3:15 p.m., Chhatrapati Shivaji International Airport was crowded, loud, and filled with the usual rush of travelers chasing flights or saying rushed goodbyes. In the middle of that noise, 2 young women stood with luggage that carried more hope than belongings. Anaya arrived with her mother, who tried to smile through her worry. She adjusted Anaya's dupatta the way mothers do when they want to hide their fear behind small gestures. Before letting her go, she held her daughter's cheeks and whispered, "Make us proud, but come home safe." A few feet away, Mira held on to her father's hand. Their relationship had never been easy, but that day he looked at her with a softness she wasn't used to seeing. He placed a small prayer locket around her neck, a silent message of protection he didn't know how else to express. The 2 girls met at the check-in counter, exchanged a nervous laugh, and tried to convince each other that everything was fine. They talked about the performance, the pay, the new world waiting for them on the other side of the ocean. They imagined stages filled with lights, and futures that finally felt possible. Before boarding, Anaya pulled out her phone and recorded a short video message. One final moment of excitement for her family to watch later. "This is it," she said. "I'll tell you everything once we land." It would be the last time her voice reached home. As the boarding call echoed through the airport speakers, they walked forward side by side. Their steps were steady. Their spirits were high. Even the nervousness they felt couldn't erase the belief that something good was ahead. Behind them, their families stood watching until the girls disappeared into the tunnel leading to the aircraft, holding on to faith, unaware that this goodbye held a weight no one recognized. The plane doors closed. Engines roared. Mumbai faded beneath them. And somewhere between the city they loved and the desert they were heading toward, their path took a turn they could never prepare for. 27th, 2019. 10:32 p.m. Their plane touched down under a warm desert night. What should have felt like the beginning of a celebration instead opened with a small, uneasy pause. There was no representative from the wedding, no welcoming team holding their names on a placard, only a crowd of strangers moving quickly through immigration. Anaya and Mira exchanged a look. Not fear, just uncertainty. They had traveled far for this opportunity, and they expected at least some form of hospitality. Instead, two men approached them without greeting or explanation. "Come," one said, lifting their bags before either woman could respond. They followed, not because they trusted the situation, but because they didn't want to create a problem in a country they barely understood. They assumed these men were hired staff. They told themselves everything would make sense soon. But the first sign of trouble came fast. Their passports were collected without permission, supposedly for hotel verification. Their phones were requested immediately after, explained as a security measure for VIP guests. It didn't feel right, but refusing didn't feel safe either. As they stepped out of the airport, they expected to see city lights, hotels, traffic, something familiar. Instead, they were guided into the back of a dark SUV and driven down a long stretch of empty road. No signs, no landmarks, no words from the men in the front seat. Mira whispered, "This doesn't look like the wedding area." Anaya tried to steady her voice. "Let's stay calm. We'll figure it out." But the silence in that car carried a message neither wanted to say aloud. With each passing mile, the city behind them disappeared, replaced by open desert and a darkness broken only by the SUV's headlights. The air in the vehicle grew heavier, not from heat, but from the growing sense that whatever awaited them wasn't what they were promised. When the vehicle finally slowed, the large steel gates of a private compound rose out of the shadows. Guards stood at both sides, armed and expressionless. The gates opened just long enough for the SUV to enter, then closed behind them with a sound that felt final. Anaya and Mira had left Mumbai with dreams, but the place they had been brought to felt far from anything they imagined. Ask yourself, at what moment does a person realize they've crossed into a situation they may not be able to walk back out of? Inside the compound, the contrast hit them immediately. There were chandeliers, polished floors, and extravagant decor, but none of it matched the warmth or hospitality they expected. It felt less like a wedding venue and more like a controlled environment, one where every movement was watched and every sound echoed too sharply. As Anaya and Mira stepped out of the SUV, the guards didn't greet them. They didn't explain where they were. They simply gestured forward, guiding the girls through a corridor lined with cameras and heavy doors that shut softly behind them. Women from different countries moved through the hallway with quiet steps, eyes fixed on the ground, avoiding all contact. Some looked exhausted, others looked numb, but none looked like guests preparing for a celebration. The girls noticed details they couldn't ignore: locked doors, guards stationed at intersections, staff members who refused to speak, phones nowhere in sight. When the guard opened a room for them, it looked polished on the surface: fresh sheets, bright lighting, and decorative touches. But the window didn't open. The lock was on the outside. And when Anaya tried asking about the wedding coordinator, the guard simply closed the door without a word. Inside the room, Mira clutched her locket. She tried to steady her breathing, but the fear crept in quickly. "This isn't what they told us," she whispered. Anaya nodded, trying to stay composed. "Let's wait until morning. Someone has to explain something." They told themselves it was a misunderstanding, maybe part of a high-security event. Maybe there was a reason for the silence. They needed to believe that, because the alternative felt too heavy to acknowledge. But what neither of them knew was that every woman who walked these halls once believed the same thing: that clarity would come, that someone would explain everything, that they were safe. Instead, the deeper truth was this: once inside those walls, no one controlled their own story anymore. Ask yourself, if a place looks beautiful but feels wrong, which one should you trust, your eyes or your instincts? The first time Anaya and Mira saw the man who controlled the compound, they understood immediately why everyone around them moved with caution. The Sheikh arrived late in the evening, surrounded by attendants who stepped aside the moment he entered. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. His presence carried an authority that came from years of living without challenge, without accountability, and without anyone brave enough to say no. He was in his late 40s, dressed in expensive traditional clothing, and walked with the confidence of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. Every guard straightened when he passed. Every staff member lowered their eyes. Even the air felt different when he moved through a room. When he approached Anaya and Mira, he didn't ask about their music. He didn't discuss schedules or rehearsals. He didn't mention the performance they were promised. He simply looked at them, quiet, assessing, as if checking off something in his mind. The girls stood still, more out of shock than respect. Anaya managed a polite greeting, hoping to establish some normalcy. Mira offered a small bow, trying not to tremble. The Sheikh didn't respond. Instead, he turned to one of his guards and muttered a brief instruction in a tone that felt final. The guard nodded, signaling that whatever expectation the Sheikh had set was already understood. Then the Sheikh walked away without another word. That short encounter left the girls with a discomfort neither could shake. Something wasn't adding up. The silence, the stares, the way their questions kept being ignored. Inside that compound, power didn't move through conversations or explanations. It moved through commands. And for the first time since their arrival, Anaya and Mira realized they weren't dealing with a host. They were facing a man whose world operated on control, not hospitality. What happens when someone with unchecked authority decides your fate before you even know you're in danger? By early morning on June 28, 2019, the truth began tightening around Anaya and Mira, not in a sudden revelation, but in a series of small moments that left no room for denial. They asked a staff member about the performance schedule. He lowered his gaze and walked away. They asked to call their families. Another guard responded with a flat, "Not allowed." When they requested their passports, they were told they would be returned after the event. No explanation, no apology, just a tone that made it clear the conversation was over before it even started. Inside the compound, women continued moving through the halls with the same quiet obedience they saw the night before. One passed close to the girls and whispered just 2 words without breaking her stride. "Don't argue." That alone sent a wave of fear through both of them. In their room, Mira paced, rubbing her thumb against the locket her mother had placed around her neck. Her voice shook as she said, "Anaya, this isn't temporary. Something is wrong." Anaya tried to stay steady, but the cracks were showing. "We need to get help. There has to be someone we can talk to. This can't be the whole story." They attempted to leave the room to find answers, but 2 guards stood directly at the door. No threats, no words, just bodies blocking their path. The weight of that moment settled in, a realization that they were not guests, they were not performers, they were not free. Their instincts pushed them toward action. They spoke in low voices, planning their next steps, trying to stay calm enough to think. But the quiet fear that filled the room made every breath heavy. They hoped morning would bring someone reasonable, someone they could appeal to, someone who could explain why everything felt controlled and why no one would speak to them. But in that compound, hope had limits, and the more they tried to cling to it, the more it slipped through their fingers. When every sign around you points toward danger, how long does it take before you stop waiting for things to make sense and start fighting to survive? By the afternoon of June 28, 2019, whatever thin layer of patience the Sheikh once had began to fade. Staff members later shared that he expected the girls to follow a set of private expectations the moment they arrived, expectations they never agreed to, never understood, and never would have accepted. Their refusal, their fear, Even their simple request to call home was viewed as defiance. Inside that compound, defiance was not tolerated. Anaya and Mira stood their ground politely, insisting they were there only to perform. They repeated it again and again, trying to keep their voices steady. They hoped reason would calm the tension growing around them. But their strength, their clarity, their refusal to bend, those were the very things that angered the Sheikh. Witnesses described him entering the hallway with an expression that sent everyone around him into silence. He listened to a brief report from one of his guards, glanced toward the room where the girls stood waiting, and issued a short command. No debate, no conversation, no mercy. Staff members nearby understood immediately. In a place where power had no limit, a single order could erase lives faster than a question could be asked. Guards entered the room. The door closed behind them, and the two young women whose voices had carried them from Mumbai were removed from sight, taken down a corridor where no one returned without permission. The compound continued its preparations for the wedding, as if nothing had shifted. Music played. Guests arrived. Laughter rose through the halls. But the absence of Anaya and Mira settled over the few staff members who knew what had been done. Some turned away. Some whispered prayers. None could intervene. Their lives, filled with promise, filled with dreams, filled with plans for a better future, were cut short in a place where no one dared to question the decisions of a man who believed he could act without consequence. And within minutes, the two voices that once carried hope across borders fell silent forever. How can a moment that begins with opportunity end with a loss so sudden and so permanent? Back in Mumbai, the silence started as a small worry, just a delay, just a missed message, nothing more. Anaya's mother checked her phone every few minutes, waiting for the promised call. Mira's father sat near the window, convinced the girls would update them once they settled in. But by the next morning, that worry had grown into a fear neither family wanted to voice. Both parents reached out to the contact who arranged the trip. His responses were short and vague. "They're fine. They're busy with rehearsals. They'll call soon." But there was something off about his tone. He avoided direct questions. He refused a video call. And when pressed further, he delivered a line that froze both families in place. They already returned home early. Returned home? To where? To who? And why wasn't anyone at the airport? That lie broke open the first wave of panic. Families rushed to local police stations, explaining everything from the invitation to the lack of contact. Officers listened, but hesitated. Without proof of wrongdoing, without confirmation of the girl's location, and without cooperation from foreign authorities, the investigation stalled before it began. Desperate, the families reached out to the Indian embassy in the UAE. The response was coldly procedural. "This appears to be a private hiring matter. You'll need to follow proper channels." Proper channels meant paperwork, waiting periods, and diplomatic layers that moved slowly. Far too slowly for families who felt something was deeply wrong. Days passed. Then a week. Messages went unanswered. Numbers stopped working. The contact who arranged their travel suddenly disappeared. Anaya's mother stopped sleeping, sitting by the front door every night in case her daughter walked in. Mira's father called every hospital in the area, convinced they must have been in an accident. And the hardest part? No one, not a single agency, could tell them where their daughters were. All they had was silence. And silence, for a parent, is the most painful answer of all. If the people responsible for protecting you turn away, where do you go next? It took 12 days of unanswered calls, misdirection, and sleepless nights before a single message finally broke the silence surrounding Anaya and Mira's disappearance. It came late at night to an Indian investigative journalist known for covering cases that involved powerful foreign nationals. The subject line was simple: "They never performed." The message itself was brief, typed from an untraceable email account. The sender claimed to be a worker inside the Sheikh's compound, someone who had seen more than they could carry alone. Their words were careful, almost fearful, but every line pointed to one conclusion: they were not brought here to sing. They asked for help. They were punished. No one will admit what happened. Attached was a blurred photo of the compound's interior, proof that the informant had access, proof that they knew the truth. The journalist immediately tried to contact the source again, but the email bounced. The account had been deleted within minutes of the first message being sent. What happened next moved faster than anything the families had experienced since the girls vanished. News outlets started asking questions. Human rights groups began pushing for answers. Social media erupted with demands for transparency. People across India wanted to know how two young performers could leave their country for a professional event and simply never come home. When approached for comment, representatives linked to the Sheikh dismissed the claims as baseless, insisting the girls left the premises safely. Yet none of them could explain why their passports had not been returned, or why they were never seen leaving on airport cameras, or why their families received conflicting information from the agent who arranged the trip. The embassy offered polite statements about ongoing communication efforts, but nothing concrete, nothing that confirmed the girls' safety, nothing that disproved the anonymous message. Behind the scenes, the informant had vanished. Inside the compound, no one spoke. And around the world, outrage grew. For the first time, the truth had reached the surface. But accountability remained a distant possibility in a place where influence overshadowed justice. Why does truth often rely on the courage of one person who risks everything to share it? Once the leaked message reached the public, something shifted, not in the halls of power, but in the hearts of people who refused to let the story fade. Journalists across India began pulling records, tracing flight paths, contacting airport staff, cross-checking timelines. Every discovery led to more questions, questions that no official wanted to answer directly. And perhaps the most disturbing question of all: how many others had been taken under similar promises and never spoken about? The more people dug, the clearer the pattern became. Young performers, especially women, often received offers that were too good to question. Payments far higher than standard rates, last-minute travel, vague details, no paperwork. And once they crossed the border into private estates guarded by influence and fear, their voices were swallowed whole. But even with growing evidence, the fight for answers moved slowly. Diplomats exchanged formal statements. Officials spoke in rehearsed tones. Nothing was said that could acknowledge wrongdoing. For Anaya and Mira's families, this was the hardest part. Not knowing, not being heard, not being given the dignity of truth. They pleaded openly on news channels, holding up photos of their daughters with trembling hands, begging for someone, anyone, to step forward with real information. But the more they pushed, the more resistance they met. Closed doors, delayed responses, technical explanations that led nowhere. People began asking, why is it so easy for powerful individuals to avoid consequences? Why do certain crimes disappear behind diplomatic shields? Why does accountability move differently when wealth enters the equation? These weren't just questions about one case. They were questions about a global system that often fails the vulnerable. And despite the attention, despite the outrage, despite the evidence, the families remained trapped in limbo, waiting for justice that still felt far from reach. If the world cannot protect its most hopeful, who decides which lives deserve answers and which ones are quietly forgotten? In the months that followed, Anaya and Mira's absence became more than a family tragedy. Their story grew into a symbol, a painful reminder of how opportunity can be twisted into something dangerous when power goes unchecked. Music communities across India held vigils, gathering in open spaces lit by candles and phone lights. Young singers played recordings of the girls' last known performances, one of Anaya's upbeat Bollywood covers and one of Meera's soft classical renditions. Their voices filled the air, echoing through streets where they once dreamed of performing for the world. Petitions circulated demanding better protection for Indian performers traveling abroad. Advocacy groups pushed for mandatory verification of all international entertainment contracts, urging authorities to protect artists whose financial struggles often forced them into risky situations. Even outside India, human rights organizations made their case in global forums. They used the incident to highlight the vulnerability of women entering foreign private estates without oversight. Their reports didn't name the Sheikh, but the implications were unmistakable. For their families, grief settled in quietly. Anaya's mother kept her daughter's microphone on a small shelf, refusing to move it. Meera's father played her practice recordings late at night, just to hear her voice again. They held on to hope. Not hope that the girls would walk through the door, but hope that the world wouldn't allow their daughter's story to fade into silence. Their names began appearing in articles, documentaries, and music forums, reminders of the thousands of young performers whose talents are often overshadowed by the dangers they face while chasing opportunity. And slowly, their story began shaping change. Organizations started offering safety workshops for young artists. Agents were pressured to disclose verifiable information. Families became more vigilant when reviewing international offers for their children. Their voices, though quieted far too soon, continued to move people. They reminded the world that dreams shouldn't come with a hidden cost. They reminded families everywhere that ambition shouldn't require risk beyond reason. They reminded society that every performer, no matter how unknown, deserves protection. What does justice look like when the truth is known, but the power to act remains out of reach? As the sun sets over the same desert where their journey ended, the world is left with a question that has no easy answer. Anaya and Meera left home with hope strong enough to cross borders, but they entered a place where their voices were taken before they ever reached a stage. Their story forces us to confront a reality many prefer not to see: how easily dreams can be manipulated when money, influence, and silence work together. It reminds us that the most vulnerable are often the ones who trust the most, who give the most, and who risk everything in the name of opportunity. But even in their absence, Anaya and Meera leave behind a message that cannot be ignored. Protection must be more than a promise. Accountability must be more than a headline. And voices, especially those rising from struggle, deserve to be heard, not used. Their final journey began with music and ended with unanswered questions. And until the world chooses to confront the systems that allow these tragedies to remain hidden, more stories will disappear behind closed doors. So as we close this chapter, I'll leave you with one question. Will the world finally hold powerful men accountable? Or will the voices of Anaya and Meera fade into the same silence that claimed them? If you believe their story must be heard, if you believe their lives mattered, and if you believe that no young artist should chase opportunity at the cost of safety, like this video, share this story, and subscribe so more hidden cases like theirs can be brought into the light. Your support keeps these voices alive. And for families still waiting for answers, your voice might be the one that makes the world listen.